10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
Look, up in the sky, it's a bird.
It's a plane!
There's no need to fear.
I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm black, y'all, and I'm blacker than black, 'cause I'm black.
Hey everybody! Welcome back to Super Black, an all-black panel podcasting experience where we talk about all things superhero, past, present, and future. From Marvel and DC to anime, there is no stone we will leave unturned as we take a deep dive into the genre of superpowered individuals and the worlds they inhabit. I am your friendly neighborhood host, Zuri Washington. I use she, her pronouns, and you can follow me on IG at Zuri with a fringe on top. That's Zuri with a Z, not Suri with an S. I'll leave it to the rest of today's super panel to introduce themselves. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Rolls Andre, OG fanboy and master thespian. You can find me on IG under Rollsie, Rollsie. It's a private account, but holla at your boy. Talk to you soon.
Hey, I'm Corinne Scott, she, her pronouns. You can find me on Instagram at I am Corinne Scott. Corinne is spelled 1 R, 2 N's, and an E. It's basically pictures of my dog and things that make me laugh. So, yeah.
We always love a Nebula shout out. But don't forget to follow the podcast itself on IG at Super Black Podcast, or you can follow us on Twitter at Super Podcast. But now that we are all assembled, let's get started. So today we have a very special guest. I don't know, it's so hard to say, like, you may know them from, because as a writer behind the scenes, most people don't know who writes some of their favorite TV shows. But I'm so excited to have him here nonetheless. He was a writer on Cloak and Dagger and Jessica Jones, which is one of my faves, as well as Supergirl, and a producer on Supergirl, which I'd love to hear more about the producing side of things. But if you didn't know him then, you know him now. Here is Jay Holtham. Welcome.
Hi, y'all. Glad to be here. Glad to be aboard. Hello.
Yes, we're so happy to have you. You're our first, like, we've had people who write, but you're our first, like, tried and true, like, TV writer who is not also an actor or kind of wearing a lot of different hats in that kind of way.
I do not wear many hats at all.
I like the hat that you wear just fine.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about yourself. There's not much that we can find about you on the internet, so I'd love to know more about your background. Where are you from originally?
Sure. I'm New York, born and bred. Lived in Brooklyn and then in Jersey. Claimed them both as home. I moved to LA about 10 years ago.
Wow.
From there. Before that, I was working in theater in New York. I worked at the Ensemble Studio Theater, had a couple plays produced there, and also was part of the admin staff. I worked for New York Stage and Film, New Dramatists, and a couple of other places. I worked with Keith Joseph Adkins to co-found the new Black Fest,
Cool.
Still running annual festival of black plays. But then around 2012, I was like, I would like to eat. And pay bills. So I went out west to sell my soul to the first available buyer, and amazingly, it worked out. And so, I worked on Pitch. On Fox was my first gig, then Cloak and Dagger for 2 seasons, the last season of Jessica Jones, and then the last 2 seasons of Supergirl. And I'm currently a co-executive producer on The Handmaid's Tale.
Wow. Oh, amazing. So when you moved to LA and you got involved in Pitch, how did you kind of segue your way to get into the nerddom of all the Marvel and DC of it all that you've been able to do?
I mean, that was what I had my sights sort of set on when I moved out here. Like Rolls, I'm an OG comic book fan and nerd. Star Trek, Star Wars, Marvel, DC, you name it. I read all the books, collected all the stuff. And so, 2012 was like the Avengers was out, and like nerddom was taken over, and I was like, okay, let me capitalize on that and find my way out here. And they made the transition from playwright to TV writer through some fellowships and through writing scripts. But I'd also watched a lot of TV, like everybody else, and sort of by osmosis gained those rhythms, and it helped make the transition relatively comfortable because I was familiar with it, and then I just sort of set my sights on getting into that world, and thankfully just had a great team. Like honestly, most of it came through my reps, but I knew that's where I wanted to go, and it was just sort of the right time. It was the time for me. Go figure.
It's interesting. Did you ever try to bring that nerddom into the theater? Like, were you ever one of these people like who tried to bring like comic book or sci-fi into the theater when you were writing for the theater?
Only a little. Like, I never really did. Like, I wrote a time travel play, which actually is one of those ironic things. Like, I wrote it in like 2008, 2009, somewhere in there, and worked on it for a number of years in New York, and couldn't get it produced anywhere. It had like 12 billion readings. Know that act. But it also then got me like my first 3 jobs were all off of this one time travel play. As someone who loves genre and loves science fiction, when I work in any genre, like I wanted to make sure I knew what I was doing before I tried that, because it meant so much to me and it can be so tricky. So even with TV and film stuff, despite working on a bunch of comic book shows, my pitches or pilots until very recently were like cop shows and sort of like a little bit of fantasy, but not really sci-fi. Now, for the first time, I feel like, okay, I actually know how these things work. So I know I feel much more comfortable adding that to the mix,
That's so cool. You said something about the transition between writing for plays versus writing for TV and film, and how it was made easier by watching a lot of TV. What are some of your favorite TV shows that you were kind of based your knowledge off of?
Well, this is going to sound real weird, but my attitude is, if I watch something like The Sopranos, I loved it. I love The Sopranos. I love The Wire. I'm like, I don't know how they did that. And I don't know how that works. Right. So my big thing was I watched a lot of like cop shows and a lot of like procedurals, I would put on TNT and watch like 8 hours of Supernatural and Bones every day. I was going through some stuff, so it was a coping method, but it was also like the thing that I like about those kinds of shows, The Mentalist, and they're good shows and I like them, but like you can see the seams. You can see, especially if you watch them a lot, you can see how it's put together in a way that, great things. Like I just watched Station 11 and I think that's brilliant. And I'm like, I have no idea how anyone sits down at a typewriter and writes that in their head, like it's just great stuff. But I'll watch Fringe and, The Closer till the cows come home and really enjoy it. And I feel like that was a good lesson for me,
And you also said that, like Rolls, you were an OG fanboy. What was your first comic book that you ever bought for yourself?
For myself?
Yeah.
Trying to remember what the first one was. It was probably an early New Mutants comic. Cool. Bill Sienkiewicz era. Those were was my right. Like that was my my soul. I was like 10. I just moved from Brooklyn to suburban New Jersey and felt like I was in another world, and reading about, a bunch of teenagers who were dealing with the same kind of shit, like really connected, and was really exciting for me. So that was my big thing. X-Men, New Mutants were big for me then. And then a lot of Spider-Man, because there were like 12 Spider-Man books, as there always are.
Like Web of Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man.
Yep. Amazing Spider-Man. It was great. And I read all of them.
Jimmy Olsen, Spider-Man's best friend.
Exactly.
It was like,
I know you've been on the West Coast for like 10 years, you said now. So I gotta ask, which is better, East, West?
Ooh, those are fighting words, and I am a lover, not a fighter. I'm really acclimated to the West Coast very well. Like, you're in the East Coast now, so it's snowing. I don't have to deal with snow. and that's real nice.
But
I
you're
feel
concerned
that.
about gas prices, though.
Well, see, that's the thing. I'm just enough of a New Yorker that I still, 10 years in, do not drive. Do not own a
Wow, you're
car.
strong. See, that's a
Wow.
strong New Yorker.
Yeah.
Do you have a driver's license?
I have a driver's
Do you
license.
okay, you're
I got
capable.
a California driver's license, but the last time I drove was when I passed my driver's test. In fact, I didn't even drive home. Like I went to I used a driving school, and as soon as the test was over, I tossed the keys back to the instructor. Was like, "Yep, nope, I'm good. I'm good now."
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
So yeah,
nice.
I don't know. The pace is easier. Like LA is easier, but New York, I think it depends on when in life you are. Like one,
Sure.
LA should be illegal for anyone to move to Los Angeles before they're 25, minimum. And even at 25, like between 25 and 30, you should have to pass like a psychological exam before you're allowed to move to LA, because this is not a town. If you don't know who you are and what you want to do, it will kill you quick.
That's
Um,
true.
but New York has that rhythm and that energy. But New York is so hard. It's so hard. Whenever I go there now, I just want to grab people on the street and say, like, you don't have to live like this. You can just leave. You can go somewhere else. So
Only forcing to 3 people currently located in
I
New York
know.
City.
Not just located, like Rose, I forget where you're from originally, but like I'm born and bred in the Bronx,
Mhm.
so like it's
I'm from
hard.
South Ocean Parks.
Yeah,
Listen,
it's
I
hard for
thought I
me
was
to like think
I thought
about
I was gonna
anywhere
die there.
else.
I thought I was gonna die in New York. You would take me out of my apartment, boots first, and then the first day I was in Los Angeles, I was like, this was an option the whole time. Nobody
Yeah.
told me that
Los
this
Angeles
was
is
an
pretty
option.
awesome.
So
Los Angeles is pretty awesome.
I do wish I had somewhere to be during the winter that wasn't here, so
Mm.
I'll follow you
That
on
is-
that
that
journey.
is true.
yeah.
So I
Uh,
just want to make sure.
Mhm.
That you weren't slumming in the New York theater
No,
so you could get into the superhero nerd business.
no.
You were a superhero nerd your whole life,
Yeah. Yeah.
and theater. So what was the attraction to theater? Like when you were young and you were into superheroes, was it an outlet for you? Like, did you feel like I'm creative and I want people to know it, or was it the art form that appealed to you?
I mean, it was all of the above. Like, I was doing theater all through like junior high and high school. I was in every play. I knew I did not want to be an actor. Like, that was definitely not anything I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a writer. In high school, I thought I wanted to be a novelist like Stephen King. And so I always loved geekdom, and I always loved comic books and science fiction. But you know how it was, like comic books and science fiction, especially being a black kid, especially being a black kid in a white suburb, like that was not a path to anything. That was not a
He ain't
viable
lying.
career path in any way. So, and picking theater is obviously also not a viable, but it was more viable. It was more respectable. It was more like a thing you could do. Yeah, and like I love theater. I do love it. Like working in theater is another matter, and it's a difficult business for a lot of
Do you
ways.
want to return? Do you want to return? Do you have a play that you want to put on at some point?
I do. The funny thing is, I gave it up in 2015. I wrote an article in American Theater about how I was not going to write any more plays, and I really walked away from it for a couple of years there, and thought I was never going to get back. But then I kind of got press ganged into a theater company against my will. Yeah. I had a friend who, a great writer that I met while working on Cloak and Dagger, and she was like, "Hey, come by my house. We're gonna like have a little brunch, drink some champagne, have some mimosas, and we're gonna like read Shakespeare plays." I was like, "This sounds cool. This sounds great." So I started doing that.
It sounds like a trap.
It was a trap. It was a trap.
It's a
Like
trap.
after like 3 or 4 weeks of that, it was like, okay, so now this is a theater company, and now you're all in it. And I was like, I didn't ask for that at all.
I just wanted to read Shakespeare.
Exactly. I just wanted to hang out with like you. And then she was like, okay, well now you have a slot for a reading, so you have to have a play. And I was like, well, okay. And so I pulled like an old play out of the closet and was like, okay, I'll just do this. And then they were like, that went well. So now you have another slot. And I'm like, well, I don't have any more plays in my trunk that I want to hear. So I guess I'll have to write a new play. And now I write plays again.
Oh, wow.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
/ horrifying at first, but like
Yeah.
cool.
It worked out. I mean, they're great people. They're like some of my favorite collaborators in the world. Bespoke Plays, if you want to look them up, out here in LA. And so now, yes, now I am a semi-retired playwright.
Speaking of Cloak and Dagger, I haven't completed the series yet, but it's like I enjoy what I've watched thus far, and it became one of my like quarantine shows. I was like, I'm gonna watch that, and so I finally got to it very recently. But yeah, I really enjoy it. How did you? It's so interesting because I know from like I'm a Wikipedia nerd, so as soon as I like watched the first episode, I was like, is this their real origin story? So then I was like,
Nope.
I'm curious as to the changes that they made to the origin story, but also how did you jump on board? At what point were you involved?
I came on after the pilot had been written and shot, and that pilot was a lot of the reason that I came onto it. You know, as Rolls knows, I am sure you remember the origin and the introduction of Cloak and Dagger back in like 1986. And at the time, through Spectacular Spider-Man, and then they showed up in New Mutants, and like at the time, it was kind of cool, but in retrospect, it is very 1980s. Sure. And when I heard they were making a TV show, I was like, there's some problematic stuff in here. He's a street kid. There's this whole thing. He doesn't have a body, and it's like he needs her to survive. So approaching it, I was like, let's see what they did. And, you know, God bless him, Joe Pakaski, who is the creator and showrunner for Cloak and Dagger, like flipped the script on the whole thing and really like reinvigorated it. And that was the attraction for me, coming into that and seeing this is like, okay, so we're approaching the story in a completely different way and in a very modern way. And that was exciting. And that was an exciting room to be in. It was, you know, the second room that I was in, and pitch was amazing. That was all heavy hitters, but this was, you know, Joe's credit, as, you know, a white guy from Boston, he put together a room that was actually really and truly diverse. There were 50% Black people, 50% women, and Black people from sort of all across the spectrum. So we got to have a real conversation about what it means to be Black. You know, in most rooms, there's one or two, and you just carry that burden of, I have to speak for everyone. So this was great to not have to feel that burden, to be able to talk about different experiences and have a boss who really listened. And really wanted to hear and really craved that impact. And so it felt great to be able to write for, you know, the first teenage Black superhero in the MCU. And Aubrey was great bringing it to life and like just getting to tell those kinds of stories and to do things that like weren't being done, you know.
Yeah, I was really bummed when I heard that it like the series proper got canceled, but I know that the actors went on to do. Was it New Mutants that they're in?
They did Runaways. They both got to reprise in the Runaways, and like we were canceled. I put in quotes, but like also like Jessica Jones, it was all, you know, it's all corporate shenanigans and all like restructuring.
Pure shenanigans.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I'd like to believe that in another better world, we would have gotten to tell many, many more fun stories with Ty and Tandy going forward, and that would have been great. And hopefully someday we'll get to go back.
I hope so. I was telling the others before you came on that I think that with the not renewed interest, but the new interest for those who are uninitiated to the Young Avengers and all the MCU adding them into all of the TV series, I feel like the show should get a second chance. Like now that we're seeing these young characters that we don't know very much about. We don't know very much about Wanda's kids or what's his name, Isaiah Bradley's grandson, and all the others who have popped up over the last few, or I guess just the last year. It's really only been a year since these TV shows.
It's really been a year.
It's really crazy to me. I'm so overwhelmed, you guys. Anyway.
So
But yeah, so I hope that there's a future for them, and I'm really excited for the potential of that. Also, speaking of Jessica Jones, oh my God, I stopped at the beginning of season 3 because I had such a heart attack. I love I love Jessica Jones, and I love Kristen Ritter. Her portrayal of Jessica
Yeah.
is like phenomenal. I I think what I love so much about Jessica is also the reason why I've stopped watching it at some point, because I was like, the trauma and the addressing of the trauma and the PTSD just had me
Mhm.
in feeling a certain kind of way. And the same reason why I still haven't watched When They See Us. Like there was just
Mhm.
like I
Yeah.
just like, my heart just like hurt watching
Mhm.
this happen. But it's such it's such a gorgeous show. How did you get involved with the Jessica Jones team?
That was great because, I worked for, the old Marvel TV division for Cloak and Dagger, and that went well, and they liked me. And they were heading into the third season of Jessica Jones, and so I got to meet with Melissa Rosenberg and Scott Reynolds and Hilly Hicks, who were sort of the triumvirate running it for that last season. And there's a lot of what you're talking about. Like, they wanted to talk about the trauma, and they wanted to dig into this character. I mean, I loved the show. I loved the first season of the show. When I actually took the gig, the second season hadn't even dropped yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a whole, again, corporate shenanigans. Um, and so it was just a great team to be a part of and a great story to tell for all of those reasons. Like, she's such a fascinating character, and they had dug so much into her past. We were like, let's try to bring it forward, but you can't just leave trauma alone. And
Right.
it was exciting to sort of dig into that as she was trying to move forward.
I don't know, something you just said reminded me of conversations we've had about Batman and how in recent talks about Batman, they're trying to move on from Batman's trauma, but I'm like, how? Why? That's like,
Yeah.
for good or bad, that is like literally the cornerstone of Batman's entire existence. And if you
Yeah.
remove that, I don't know who we have. I don't need another Superman. I need
Yeah.
Batman.
You need
So,
Batman. You need that. Also, you've got Dick right there, and Dick
right,
is, Batman without the trauma, and is
right,
just beautiful on his own. But he only
exactly,
works with Batman.
right.
It's very interesting you brought up Batman, because what I wanted to ask you
Hmm.
is about, you've worked with Marvel and now you went to Supergirl.
Yeah.
What is that whole transition like, going from the whole new, a totally different universe, a totally different way of operating?
Yeah. I mean, it was a very different way of operating, a very different sort of set of toys to play with.
Mm.
But, thankfully, all of the same stuff happens, and like all the same sort of vocabulary and all the same sort of tools are at play of just how you're telling story. But it is very different. Like, DC has, such an iconic history, and like it's so much larger than life. Particularly, working in the MCU. The MCU is so grounded and so realistic, and it's so
Yeah.
sort of like, especially Jessica Jones is so sort of gritty and like and real. And then I'm on Supergirl, and it's all like kryptonite, and she can do anything, and it's just a very, very different mindset. Ironically, what I brought to it a lot was a lot of my Star Trek, because the Supergirl show here on the CW had a real sci-fi bent to it. There were a lot of aliens, there's a lot of tech sort of involved in it. So like I leaned a lot on all of my Star Trek psychobabble, or technobabble of like, modulate the frequency and match the harmonic waves, and then whatever, something happens. So yeah, it's very different going from, Jessica Jones and talking about trauma, and Cloak and Dagger and talking about like police brutality and the experience of Black people, to Supergirl talking about like aliens and spaceships and time travel, and not that we didn't deal with some heavy stuff. The last episode I got to write is one I'm really, really proud of, or one of the last episodes I got to write for Supergirl is one I'm really proud of. I worked with one of our actors, Ozzy Tesfaye, to introduce her character Kelly Olsen as Guardian, and we were really committed to making it essentially about a Black Lives Matter issue, but not in sort of the way that a lot of shows deal with it. And we didn't want to center Black trauma, we didn't want to center Black pain, but we wanted to make it real and to make it feel real, and to find a way to talk about prejudice and talk about implicit biases, and the sort of, as we called it, the blind spots that the heroes have. And like that was, I'm really, really proud of what we were able to do in that episode. But yeah, it's also at the same time, we're sucking energy out of people and redistributing it with fifth dimensional energy and talking about, the properties of, how mind control actually works. It's that kind of show.
Because you have many hats, as you said.
hmm
What is, if a what were those things called in high school? The quick notes or something?
hmm
Where you talk about, like, what is an executive
hmm
show writer, an executive, or like the
Yep.
showrunner, or because I don't know
Yep.
how any of that works.
Oh no worries. The very cliff notes of it. The showrunner is usually the executive producer, often the creator of a show, and they're the boss. Like, that's your boss. They're the one who set the tone for the show, decide what the show is about, and usually wind up rewriting and writing a bunch of scripts. But they talk with production, they oversee production. As anyone with a producer title, like, the biggest difference is whether or not you get to go to set, or be involved in sort of post-production, editing, and finishing the episode and all of that. Beyond that, everything is the same job. You go to work generally every day at about 10 o'clock in a writer's room, and you sit around and you talk about writing and the show literally all day. You're just in a brainstorming session until 5 or 6 o'clock, with an hour for lunch in there. And it's just a lot of talking and then eventually going off to write. When you become a producer, you get to go to set, like I said, and cover set and deal with the actors and the crew and get to learn what that's about. Like, that was great. I didn't get to do that on Cloak and Dagger and Jessica Jones just because of the way the schedule worked out and because of the level I was at. But getting to do that on Supergirl, like, I learned a whole other thing about writing and a whole other thing about how to deal with production and how to think about production issues, how many sets, what coverage, because it's a whole other skill set that you can really only develop sort of on the fly.
That's cool.
I know all the titles kind of like mushed together at some level, but how did you get involved in specifically having a producing credit? Like, because I know it's so different from theater.
Yeah.
In how, when we think of producers as theater people, it's completely different of how it works on an on-camera set. So can you explain a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, one of the great things, the biggest difference between playwriting and screenwriting, or one of the biggest differences I find, besides the vast sums of money involved, is that TV writing is essentially a union job. And so as long as you keep working and as long as your bosses like you and people like working with you, you kind of just naturally move up the ranks, from staff writer to story editor to executive story editor to eventually you become a producer. And it's just, like I said, it's all of those things are basically the same job, but as you rise up at producer level, you just get slightly more responsibilities. And it all depends, again, on your boss, on the showrunner, and what things they want to give up and what things they don't. My current boss, Bruce Miller, on The Handmaid's Tale, is actually very good at sort of engaging the producers on a lot of different ways. Like, I was working with a couple of other people, I'm the liaison for costumes. So I was involved in hiring our costume designer for this season, and directors, and pulling together a list of directors and doing things like that. Producer in TV is much more of a managerial position and much more sort of administrative. It is much more figuring stuff out than it is sort of like artistic producing as you think of in theater. And it's certainly not like, I'm not writing checks to anybody. It's somebody else's money. I don't even know where it comes from, but it's also my job to make sure we don't spend too much of it. Or really, ultimately, it's my showrunner's job. Like, when I'm on set, covering set for a TV show, I'm there to make sure that, like, we're getting the footage we need to make the episode, we're getting all the scenes we need for the storytelling, and we're doing it within the sort of union days on set. And if there's any kind of problem, like on one episode I did for Supergirl, we were supposed to have a scene that was going to shoot outside, and it was like right near the end of the day, and it started raining, like, really badly, and there was no way we were going to be able to get this shot outside. And so it was like, but that was the end of our day, and the rest of our days were packed. So it was a conversation that I had to, like, call my boss back in LA and say, hey, it doesn't look like we're going to get this, but we're going to come up with a plan for us to shoot it later, or we'll change the location so we can shoot it inside somewhere. And that's the job. Like, that's part of the work as a producer and part of the work as a TV writer.
problem solving.
Yeah, problem solving. It's a lot of problem solving. All of it is problem solving because even the writing is
Right, it's
mostly problem solving.
Right.
Like,
How do we get character from point A to point B? And
exactly.
yeah.
Yep.
Map out
Yep.
the entire season.
Yep. And like, where does this episode fit in that arc? And what's the most natural and most interesting way for that to happen? And so much of it is just problem solving.
What's it like when you're writing? Speaking of what you just mentioned, what's it like when writing a specific episode in the arc of a season that's possibly already more or less figured out, or like what's that minutia kind of?
I mean,
What's that like?
It's good because it's such a collaborative art in that way. You know, when we sit down in the writers' room, we're starting as a group from a blank page for the beginning of the season, and really at the beginning of every episode. At the beginning of every episode, you're like, okay, what is this episode about? And it's you start to figure it out, but you have 6, 7, 8 other brains to help figure it all out, and to figure out all the steps, and to bounce things off of, and to fill out ideas, and you do that work together. So by the time you're going off to an outline, if everyone has done their job correctly, you know what this episode is, and you know what's going to happen, and it becomes a lot easier to like actually put down the words, because really all you're doing is putting down dialogue. And sometimes you're figuring out like sequences and exactly how this is going to play out, exactly what people are going to see. And that part is fun. And for me but by that point, again, if everyone's done their job, is easy. You have dialogue pitches, you have a sense of like very specifically, what is this scene about? What are they talking about? What are they trying to achieve? And then what happens next? And it all should, in a perfect world, in the hands of professional writers, flow naturally from one thing to another.
Wow.
Not a good segue, but have you ever been a part of a casting process? Like, what's that been like from your perspective?
I mean, from my perspective, it's not that different from theater. You know, thankfully everything is, available on Zoom and on TV, and it's just, they send you clips of people's auditions and you get to sort of watch them audition and try to figure out who's going to fit the story best and who's going to fit the vibe of the scene and all of that. You know, ultimately those decisions again are made by the showrunner at the end of the day, but like, we get input, especially if it's your episode. Like if you're writing this part, it's your episode, you want to be able to say like, okay, this is what this character is supposed to be like. They're supposed to be funny, or they're supposed to be weird or scary, and making sure that you're getting that. So yeah,
that's cool.
Are there any projects you'd want to work on? Any characters in the DC canon that you're like,
or any
like
canon,
to tackle?
completely honest.
There are a bunch. Let me see. I would love to work on some Legion of Superheroes.
That'd be awesome.
That would be
So
a
I need to
lot
do that
of
already.
fun. I've got this weird thing in Marvel about a bunch of Spider-Man villains who call themselves the Syndicate now, and they're super fun. I actually am doing a little online comic for them right now that involves some of those, and so that should be dropping soon, and that'll be great. I don't know, and plus also comics right now, I'm so excited about them, like even beyond Marvel and DC. There's so many great stories, so many great creators out there telling such weird and interesting and different kinds of things. You know, every week I go into the comic book shop and come out like $200 poorer because I bought like half the place. You know, it's such a great time.
Yeah, we had Kwanzaa Osajifo on who wrote Black. So we've been delving into some of the lesser known in the wider world of comic books. So yeah,
Black's a great book. Black's a really great book.
It's really great. Are you a con guy? Like, do you go to cons?
I mean, when cons existed, I went to.
They're trying this year to do some live.
I hope so.
Omicron Con.
Omicron Con.
Out of here rules.
Let's hope not. Oh man. I did. I really liked going to. There's a mid-sized con out here, WonderCon, but I went to a couple of years, once in Anaheim and once here. I'd been to the big one to San Diego twice, I think, and that was overwhelming. San Diego is just,
I was about to say, that sounds
Ooh.
overwhelming.
it's so massive. It's just it's so much. It's way too much. Just way too much. But it's also super fun and like
Of course.
exciting to be there and exciting to be a part of it. So I'm excited to go back to cons when we have them. Listen, I love cosplay. I love knickknacks and tchotchkes and like and t-shirts, and that's what it's all about for me. You know, even more than the panels are great. I went to a couple really good ones in New York Comic Con as well.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it's just, you go for the sights and the sounds,
Do you cosplay? And if
No.
so, okay, I was just curious. I was like, what's your
So much
go-to cosplay?
time.
I have too many scars from Halloween as a kid. Like,
Oh no.
it was rough.
Oh no.
Do you hold any desire to write the actual books ever? Like, would you
Yeah.
take on a run?
Yeah. I mean, I've been very excited and actually really lucky. The last few months, I've actually worked my way into some comic book writing. There's a Marvel Voices dropping in a couple weeks from this early February, where I get to do a story about Sam Wilson as Cap that I really liked, and then there's a Mirror Geordie comic coming out from IDW in a couple of weeks or a couple months. I think it's dropping in March that I got to do. So a one shot there. And then, like I said, this online comic that hasn't quite been announced yet. So hopefully they won't yell at me too much about it. So yeah, and like I've got a couple of original ideas, and like it's such a great medium. You can do so many things with it, and it's so different than TV or film or theater writing. There's a kind of immediacy to it and a kind of simplicity and just a beauty to it that I'm really enamored right now.
Who are some of your favorite comic writers?
Oh man, Tom King, Tom Taylor are both great. Pornsak Pichachot, who's a buddy of mine and has a terrific book out now, The Good Asian, that's just blowing my mind. Christopher Cantwell, I'm really liking. I think Latoya Morgan's book, Dark Blood, is really great. Highly, highly recommend that. The book that I'm most excited about now, I'm so glad that Saga is back. God, I miss Saga.
Love Saga. Love that book.
It's so glad that it's back. Brian K. Vaughan is obviously, the master, and all praises to him. And then this other smaller one by a writer named Chris Sabella called Dirtbag Rapture, about a woman who can carry ghosts in her head, and that's her job. She pays to transport ghosts around, and then all sorts of random things happen. And she also does a terrific amount of drugs, and is just great.
Terrific amount of drugs.
Ooh, that's what she spends her money on. It's great. It's wonderful. Really, really wonderful. Like one of my favorite books of the last year or so.
For some reason, that reminded me of there's some anime that reminds me of. But are you an anime person at all?
No, that's the one. Yeah, that's the one bit of nerddom that sort of slipped past me. When all my friends got real deep into Cowboy Bebop, I don't know. I was doing something else, probably too much theater. So I just sort of missed that pathway. But I think
I was just a little too old. I think I was like 2 years too old before that all hit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There was like, I missed whatever the on-ramp was, like whether it was like Macross or whatever, there was like an on-ramp that everyone else got that like I never made that turn into anime. I mean, listen, I loved Akira, but like after Akira, I was done.
Yeah, there are examples of it I think are fantastic. It's just I didn't get into the whole thing like some people did. Some of my friends are just like, they're just all about it. I'm like, okay.
Oh no. Someday, one of these days, I'll get back into it.
There will be time.
Do you have, I know you mentioned some of the things that you're working on right now. Do you have anything else that you are able to talk about at this juncture that you're working on?
No, that's pretty much everything I got going. That's pretty much everything I got going. And then, at some point later this year, Handmaid's Tale season 5 will drop, and we'll see what happens next.
So let me ask you a question. What like do you consider yourself like and I don't mean this like in any kind of derogatory sense. I just mean that, like, I mean, I think some people would think this is a great way to sell themselves. Do you consider yourself like a good writer for women? Like could you put that on your like shingle?
I do. I mean, I try. Like, I'm a dude, and all cisgender, so like I have blind spots all over the place about so many things. But I've always, enjoyed writing good parts for women and trying to, you know, break stereotypes in all those ways and trying to break tropes. And I think so. Luckily, like, it seems that way. People have hired me and have allowed me to write women, and have said that I didn't fuck it up. So, I'll take that. But to me, it's also important that, like, I mean, like everything, like, women should just have a voice. Like, there just shouldn't be rooms that are not at least 50% women. Like, that's just silly. And we should be able to, also, like with people of color, with black folk, like there should be a spectrum of it that we get to see. Like, that's one of the things I loved about Yellow Jackets this year, is that, like, just so many different kinds of women. And just at the end of the day, though, it's just about, like, there should be so many different kinds of characters.
Right.
They're just like, that's good writing, is that you're filling your world with interesting people, not just a bunch of stereotypes doing stereotypical things.
Amen.
The last question that I have for you is, you mentioned earlier some about the room for Cloak and Dagger being 50% women, 50% black. My question for you is, across the rest of your career, what's it been like for you, and do you see a change happening in the rooms you've been in since Cloak and Dagger?
I mean, I do see a change happening. I see a change happening in the industry, sort of at the front level of the kinds of stories and the kinds of projects that are getting greenlit and the kind of writers that they're bringing in. And I have been lucky to be in, like, not often. I've often been the only black person, but not always the only person of color. And I've gotten to work with a lot of women, which has been good and has been great. But it is, I mean, it's such a catch-22, right? And it always is, like, the catch-22 of, I'm always aware that one of the reasons they're hiring me is because I'm a black writer and they have a black character that they don't, or two that they don't feel like has been given their due. And so I'm happy to do that, but at the same time, like, I don't want to just be pegged as a guy who writes for black people. But at the same time, when I'm working on my own projects, I want to make sure to center those stories and center those voices and offer those kinds of worlds. So it's real complex every day, and a real navigation to do. And, like, I don't want to, my bosses have all been good people. I've been really, really lucky. I've had friends who have some pretty deep scars from some very racist and very sexist and very bad bosses, and I don't have any of that. My bosses have all been really receptive and have all been people who wanted to hear different perspectives and different voices. Sometimes it took a little more work than others, but it's gonna be that way. And, like, so I've been really lucky and really blessed to feel like I've had a positive impact on that. But it's also, I've been really lucky and really blessed to have a lot of colleagues who, back me up, and I get to back them up, and who, come right out. Like, I worked with someone, on one of the projects, were talking about introducing a minor character or a new character to the thing, and then the possibility of killing them. And when we first started talking about this character, they were going to be a person of color. And then as soon as we started talking about killing them, someone else in the room, a white woman, was like, well, then she can't be a person of color because we have killed too many people of color on the show. And, like, we don't want to keep doing that. And, like, it was nice to have someone else voice that. And so the industry is trying, but like everything, it's a big industry full of a lot of people and is very slow to turn. But hopefully the trends will keep going.
And then my last question, who's your favorite superhero and why?
Oh man. Captain Marvel, the DC Captain Marvel that we call Shazam.
Okay. Shazam.
I have a tattoo, like, he goes way back, and it's obviously all the wish fulfillment of being a little kid and feeling powerless in a scary world, and then being able to turn into a big, powerful adult with one magic word. Plus, he's, like, even more cheesy and good dudeness than Superman. Like he's just Captain Marvel's just great. And lastly, one of my many interesting and fabulous and always entertaining party tricks is to explain why there are two Captain Marvels. It is a long and interesting story involving the Supreme Court with one of the more ironical endings in the world, but I will not bore you with that tale right now.
I thought you were going to name the different gods of Shazam. I thought.
Oh, I mean, I can. I will.
He said, "Don't get me started."
Don't get me started. Don't get me started.
I thought it was going to be something like that, but it was the whole legal tale.
Well,
oh man, it's a very interesting legal story.
I know. I've read all about it. It's so fascinating. Another time we will discuss this. But thank you so much for coming on today. We really appreciate you being here, especially on this Sunday, which is cold in New York, but I'm sure it's beautiful and 70 degrees in Los Angeles.
It's perfect. It's actually a little chilly. It's like 68. So
-1 here with wind chill.
Let me tell you, my blood got thin real quick. Real quick.
Can you tell people where they can find you online?
The best place to find me is on the Twitters, on your Twitter machines, at @JHoltham. But I'm also on Instagram at the same handle.
Fabulous. Again, thank you so much for being here. I'll have the rest of the panel lead us out.
It's me, Corinne Scott. You can find me on Instagram at I am Corinne Scott. Corinne spelled with one R, two N's, and an E. Pictures of my dog. And her eating the snow while she walks. It's adorable.
Nonsense. Dogs are ridiculous with that, but continue.
Rolls Andre, he, him. You can find me on IG at Rollsy. It's private, but, holla at me. I might get you in. And I'm an OG fanboy and a master thespian. And I'll be here whenever I'm asked.
And as always, I'm your friendly neighborhood host, Zuri. I use she, her pronouns, and you can find me at Zuri with a fringe on top. Don't forget to follow the podcast on IG and on Twitter. Twitter is going to be at SuperPodcast, and IG is at SuperBlackPodcast. I'd again like to thank our guest, Jay Holtham, which, by the way, what does Jay stand for? I forgot to ask.
Oh, Jason.
Amazing. Now we know.
It's the most boring version.
No, but now we know. But yes, thanks again to our guest. And as always, here's our sign off. Should you need heroes, we've got your back. We fear no topic, we attack. If conversation is what you lack, you'll find it here with Super Black. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.